ground would not open for her. The iron blade struck the frozen earth again and again, each blow ringing sharp in the still air, until her hands shook and the sound blurred with the wind. Snow crept into the hole she had barely started, as if the land itself refused what she had come to do. She stood alone at the edge of the small cemetery, a narrow stretch of fence half buried by drifts. Beyond it, the prairie lay white and endless, the sky low and pale, pressing down like a weight. The woman's coat hung loose on her thin frame, dark with frost along the hem. At her feet rested a small wooden box, plain and light enough that she could lift it with one arm, though it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. Her breath came out in short clouds. She wiped her face with a gloved hand, leaving a wet streak that froze almost at once. She did not look at the box again. If she did, she knew she would not be able to stand. She drove the shovel down once more. It skidded sideways, biting nothing. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the snow without a sound. For a long moment, she stayed there, her forehead pressed to the ground, as if she might will it to soften beneath her. There had been no one to ask for help. The nearest town lay miles away, and she had not gone there since before the baby grew ill. Neighbors were scattered, their lives hard and full, and she had learned early not to expect anyone to stop for her troubles. This was her burden, and she had come to carry it through, no matter the cost. The wind shifted, lifting the hem of her coat, whispering across the headstones. She pulled herself upright again, gripping the shovel with numb fingers. The iron felt colder now, heavier. That was when she heard the horse. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her ears. Then the sound came again. Slow, steady hooves packed with snow. She turned stiffly, as if moving too fast might break something inside her. A man rode up along the fence line, his hat pulled low, his coat dusted white. He reined in without haste, as if he had known all along that he would stop here. For a moment, he only looked at her, then at the small box by her feet, then at the shallow, broken patch of earth. He did not ask her name. He did not ask what had happened. He dismounted, tied his horse to the fence, and took the shovel from her hands with a nod so slight it was almost nothing. She did not resist. She watched him work. He fetched tools from his saddle, an iron bar, heavier than the shovel, and drove it into the ground with measured strength. Each strike was deliberate. The earth cracked, not all at once, but enough. He worked until his breath fogged thick in the air and frost clung to his beard. When the hole was deep enough, he paused. He looked at her then, really looked, as if making sure she was still there. She knelt and lifted the box. Her arms trembled, but she did not falter. Together, without a word, they lowered it into the ground. The man removed his hat. He stood straight, shoulders squared, eyes lowered. From somewhere inside his coat, he took a folded paper, worn soft at the edges. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and steady, carrying just far enough to reach her. The words were simple, about rest, about peace, about a life too short for the weight it had been given. She did not cry then. The tears came later, after the earth was returned to its place, after the last clump of frozen soil was pressed down by his boots. Another wagon arrived, then two more. Folks from nearby spreads had seen the rider stop and understood enough to follow. They stood back, hats in hand, offering presents instead of questions. Someone left a small marker at the head of the grave. Someone else placed a wool blanket over her shoulders. When it was done, the man who had helped her turned to leave. He hesitated only once, then handed her the shovel back, as if returning something borrowed. "If you need anything," he said, not looking at her, "I'm over on the south ridge." She nodded. It was all she could manage. He mounted his horse and rode away, his shape slowly swallowed by the white land. The others followed, one by one, until the cemetery was quiet again. She stood there long after, staring at the fresh mound of earth. The ground had finally given way, but it had taken more than she had left to give. As the wind moved across the prairie, she realized something she had not expected. She was still standing. The world had not ended. And though the pain remained, sharp and unmoved, she was no longer entirely alone. The days after the burial blurred together, not because time moved fast, but because it barely seemed to move at all. Morning came, then night, and she passed through them the same way she passed through the small rooms of her cabin. Careful, quiet, as if any sudden movement might stir something that should remain still. The cabin stood alone near a line of bare cottonwoods, their branches rattling whenever the wind picked up. Inside, the stove gave off a steady heat, but the warmth did not reach very far. She kept to her shawl even indoors, more from habit than need. The cradle sat empty near the wall, its blanket neatly folded, untouched since the night she carried the child out into the cold for the last time. She moved through her days by routine. She split wood, fed the chickens, checked the latch on the door. She ate because her body demanded it, not because she felt hunger. At night, she lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the wind push against the cabin like a living thing. Sleep, when it came, brought memories she did not ask for. She saw the road again, the long ride into town with the baby wrapped tight against her chest. She heard the weak sound of breathing that grew thinner by the mile. She remembered her husband too, not as he had been at the end, but earlier, standing in this same room, smiling without reason, full of plans he never got to finish. Those memories did not come with warning. They arrived while she was washing her hands or stirring a pot, and they left her frozen in place until she could steady herself again. She learned to breathe through them, slow and measured, the way she had during the worst nights of illness. Once, she caught herself speaking aloud, calling a name into an empty room. The sound of her own voice startled her. After that, she stayed silent. The man from the cemetery did not come often. When he did, it was never announced. She would look up from her work and find something had changed. A stack of firewood higher than before. A broken hinge fixed. A sack of grain left just inside the door. He did not stay. Sometimes she saw him from the window, already walking away, his coat pulled tight against the cold. Other times, she only knew he had been there by the proof he left behind. At first, his help unsettled her. It reminded her of how little she could manage on her own. Pride rose up, sharp and defensive, but the work still needed doing, and she was too tired to argue with what eased the load. He never asked for thanks. He never asked her anything at all. Weeks passed. The snow deepened, then settled. The sky remained a dull gray, day after day, as if color had been taken from the world. One afternoon, she found him mending the fence near the barn. He nodded to her and went on with his work. She stood there for a moment, unsure why she had come outside, then fetched a hammer and held the board steady while he worked. They did not speak. When the last nail was set, he tipped his hat and left. That night, as she sat by the stove, she realized something else she had been avoiding. She was not living. She was only moving forward because stopping felt worse. Each task filled time, but none of it reached her. She thought of the small grave under the snow, of the way the ground had resisted, and then finally opened. The memory hurt, but it also carried a strange truth. Even frozen earth could be broken, if struck enough times. The man's quiet presence lingered in her thoughts, not as a comfort, exactly, but as proof that the world had not closed itself entirely. Someone had seen her at her worst and had not turned away. She did not know what she wanted from the days ahead. She only knew she could not remain as she was forever. The weight inside her was too heavy, and carrying it alone had begun to wear her down. When she blew out the lamp and lay back, the night felt no less empty. But for the first time since the burial, She allowed herself to wonder, not about happiness or forgetting, but about what it might mean to survive in a way that left room for something more. Winter loosened its grip slowly, not with warmth, but with small signs that only someone watching closely would notice. The snow along the south side of the cabin thinned first. Water began to drip from the roof in the late mornings, tapping a steady rhythm into a tin pan she set outside the door. The sound followed her through the day, quiet but persistent. The man came more often now, though never in a way that felt forced. Sometimes it was to help with hauling feed. Other times he brought a book he thought she might like, or a small sack of apples saved from the fall. He stayed longer than before, long enough to finish a task or share a simple meal at the table. They spoke in short sentences at first, about the weather, about the animals, about how much longer winter might last. He listened more than he talked, and when he did speak, his voice carried no hurry. It made the silence between them feel easier to bear. They worked side by side most days. She held boards while he planed them smooth. He showed her how to set a snare where rabbits passed near the brush line. She taught him which hens laid best and which ones to leave alone. The work filled the hours without demanding anything else from her. In the evenings, they sat by the stove. Sometimes she read aloud while he fixed tack or sharpened tools. Other nights, he brought out a small harmonica and played low, steady tunes that drifted through the room like smoke. The music did not ask her to feel anything in particular. It simply existed, and she found comfort in that. Trust grew without being named. She no longer startled when she heard his boots on the porch. She left the door unlatched on days she knew he might come by. The cabin, once heavy with absence, began to feel lived in again. Then, one afternoon, while sorting through a box of old papers, she found her husband's coat folded at the bottom. The sight of it caught her off guard. She pressed it to her chest, breathing in the faint smell of wool and smoke. Memories rushed in, laughter, long talks by lamplight, plans spoken softly so as not to wake the baby. The man stood in the doorway when she turned. He saw the coat in her hands and understood at once. He did not step closer. He did not speak. He waited. Something inside her shifted then, sharp and sudden. The comfort she had begun to feel turned into doubt. She wondered if she was betraying the life she had lost by letting another presence fill her days. She wondered if the calm she felt was earned or merely borrowed. She folded the coat carefully and set it back in the box. When she looked up, her eyes were steady, but her voice was not. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, not quite meeting his gaze. He nodded, slow and thoughtful. "I'm not here to take anything that isn't given." The words stayed with her long after he left that evening. She sat alone by the stove, listening to the fire crackle, weighing a choice she had not realized she was making. There was safety in holding on to the past, in keeping her heart guarded and still. But there was also a quiet ache in refusing what life placed before her now. Days passed. They returned to their routine, but something had changed. She noticed it in the way her thoughts lingered on his absence, in the way she waited for his footsteps. The work felt heavier when done alone. One night, as the wind moved gently through the trees, she stood by the window and looked out at the dark land. She thought of the grave, of the frozen ground that had finally given way. She thought of the choice she faced, not between forgetting and remembering, but between closing herself off and allowing room for something new. When he came again, she met him at the door. There were no promises spoken, no sudden declarations. Only a shared understanding that whatever lay ahead would be built slowly, with care. Hope did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, like the first thin line of green pushing through snow. And for the first time in many months, she did not turn away from it. The storm arrived without warning, rolling in from the north with a hard wind that bent the trees and filled the air with sharp snow. By the time she noticed the sky darkening, The first heavy flakes were already falling. The man was still there, helping her move feed into the barn, when the wind rose enough to make the doors rattle. They worked faster then, not speaking, each knowing what needed to be done. The animals sensed the change and shifted uneasily. By the time they finished, the path back to the house was already fading beneath fresh snow. Inside the cabin, the air felt tight and close. She added wood to the stove while he shook the snow from his coat. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, steady and loud, as if testing their strength. It became clear they would not be able to travel until the storm passed. Neither said it out loud. He settled into a chair near the door, leaving space between them. She poured coffee and set a cup in front of him, her hands steady even as her thoughts raced. As night came on, the storm worsened. Snow struck the windows in hard bursts. The lamp flickered once, then held. The sound of the wind filled every corner of the room, leaving no space for distraction. She sat at the table staring into her cup, while he watched the fire. Something about being trapped there together, with nowhere else to go, made the silence heavier than before. After a long while, she spoke. "I thought I could carry it alone," she said, her voice low. "I told myself that was strength." He did not interrupt. "But there are days when it feels like I'm standing still while everything else keeps moving." Her hands tightened around the cup. "I don't know where I belong anymore." The words surprised her as much as they might have surprised him. She had not planned to say them. Once spoken, they seemed to open a door she had kept shut for months. She told him about the nights when the cabin felt too quiet, about the fear of forgetting small details she wanted to hold on to forever, about the guilt that came with feeling even a brief moment of peace. He listened without looking away. When she finished, he nodded once. "I won't pretend to know that kind of loss," he said. "But I know what it's like to wonder if you've waited too long to step back into life." The storm howled outside, louder now. The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Later that night, as they prepared to sleep on opposite sides of the room, something shifted in him. Watching her move about the cabin, he felt a sudden doubt rise up, sharp and unwelcome. He questioned his own presence there, whether his help had been given freely, or whether he had begun to hope for something in return. By morning, the storm had eased, leaving the world buried and quiet. He rose early, gathering his things. She noticed his distance at once. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes," he answered. "As soon as I can clear the path." They worked together again, but the ease between them was gone. His movements were careful, guarded. When the way was finally passable, he led his horse to the door. "I don't want to be a reason you feel pressured," he said, still not meeting her eyes. "You've been through enough." She felt a familiar ache then, not sharp, but deep. She understood his doubt, but she could not accept being left in uncertainty again. She stepped forward. "I won't ask you to stay," she said, "but I won't live in between either. If you're here, be here because you choose to be, not out of kindness alone." The words settled between them, firm and clear. For a moment neither moved. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the conflict written plainly on his face. He nodded once, slow and thoughtful, then turned and walked out into the white morning. She watched him go until he disappeared beyond the trees. The cabin felt larger without him, the silence deeper. But this time, it was not empty in the same way. She closed the door and stood still, her heart unsteady but resolute. Whatever came next would have to be chosen, not assumed. And for the first time, she knew she would not accept anything less. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in small, careful signs, as if the land itself was unsure whether it was ready to change. The snow pulled back from the fields, leaving dark soil beneath. Streams of water traced new paths through the low ground. The air carried a different weight now, softer, easier to breathe. She noticed the changes as she went about her days. The animals moved with more energy. The trees along the creek showed the first signs of green. She worked from morning to dusk, her body tired but steady, her thoughts clearer than they had been in months. The man did not return right away. Days passed, then more. She told herself she had expected this. She had drawn her line, and he had respected it. Still, she caught herself listening for hoofbeats that never came. One morning, she walked to the small cemetery beyond the cottonwoods. The ground there was no longer frozen. She knelt by the grave and brushed away old leaves and dirt, straightening the simple marker. She did not speak aloud. Some things no longer needed words. She stayed there a long time, thinking of what had been lost and what remained. The ache was still present, but it no longer filled every corner of her. It rested beside her now, heavy but familiar. When she rose to leave, she saw him standing a short distance away, his hat in his hands. He had not followed her to the grave. He waited where the path began, giving her space. "I didn't come back right away," he said when she reached him. "I needed to be sure." She studied his face. He looked the same, and not the same at all. Tired, perhaps. Steadier, too. "Sure of what?" she asked. "That I wasn't staying because it was easier than being alone," he said. "And that I wasn't hoping you'd need me just to give my own life shape." The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. "I'm here because I want to build something with you," he continued. "Only if you choose it too. Not to replace what you lost, not to stand in its shadow, just to walk alongside it." She felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. He was not offering rescue. He was offering partnership. They walked back toward the cabin together, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence. The land around them showed signs of work yet to be done, fences to mend, fields to tend. Life waiting. Their days took on a new shape after that. He moved his things into the small spare room, careful not to take over space that was not his. They worked together, sharing the weight without needing to name it. In the evenings, they sat at the table, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. There was no rush. What grew between them did so quietly, built on trust and clear choice. The past was not pushed aside. It was acknowledged, honored, carried forward. When they married, it was a simple gathering. A few neighbors stood by. The wind moved gently through the grass. She wore no bright colors. He held her hand as if it were something precious and real. Later that day, they returned to the grave together. He stood back while she knelt, then joined her, placing a small bundle of early wildflowers beside the marker. "This stays," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I know," he replied. They walked home as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. The house waited for them, solid and familiar. Inside there would be work and meals and quiet nights. There would be memories that still brought pain. There would also be laughter in time and moments of peace. As they reached the door, she paused, looking out at the land one last time. The loss she carried had shaped her, but it had not ended her story. She stepped inside, not because the past had loosened its hold, but because she had chosen to keep going anyway. And in that choice, life had found a way to meet her halfway.